Jake was sitting on his old couch holding the letter that should have made him the happiest man in the world. The paper was slightly wrinkled from his sweaty palms, but the words were clear as day. Full scholarship to law school. 3 years of studying every night after his delivery job had finally paid off. He couldn't wait to tell Rebecca the good news. But when Rebecca walked through the door of his tiny apartment that evening, something felt different. She wasn't smiling like she usually did. Her expensive purse looked out of place against his second-hand furniture, and she kept checking her phone every few seconds. "We need to talk," she said, not even sitting down. Those 4 words hit Jake harder than any punch he'd ever taken. He stood up, still holding the acceptance letter. "Actually, I have some amazing news. I got into law school with a full scholarship. Can you believe it? All those late nights studying finally worked out." Rebecca barely glanced at the paper in his hands. "That's nice, Jake, but we need to be realistic here." "Realistic about what?" Jake felt his stomach drop. This wasn't how he imagined this conversation going. She sighed and finally sat down on the edge of his couch like she didn't want to get too comfortable. "Look, I've been thinking about us, about our future, and I just don't see how this is going to work." Jake sat down next to her, confused. "What do you mean? I just told you I got into law school." "This changes everything." "In 3 years, I'll be a lawyer. We can have the life you want." 3 years, Jake. 3 more years of this. She gestured around his small apartment. 3 more years of splitting $20 dinners and taking the bus everywhere. 3 more years of you working all day and studying all night. But it's temporary. This scholarship means I won't have student loans. When I graduate, I'll have a good job and we can— "I can't wait that long," Rebecca interrupted. "I'm 25 years old. My friends are getting engaged, buying houses, going on real vacations, not weekend trips to the lake in your old car." Jake felt like the room was spinning. "I thought you understood what we were working toward. I thought you believed in us." Rebecca stood up and walked to the window. "I did for a while. But I met someone else." The words hung in the air like a slap. Jake stared at her back, trying to process what she'd just said. "Someone else?" She turned around, and for the first time she looked a little guilty. "His name is David. He's a financial advisor. He has his own place downtown, a nice car. He can give me the life I want now, not someday." Jake felt anger rising in his chest, but it was mixed with something worse. Shame. "So this is about money." "It's not just about money," Rebecca said quickly. "It's about stability. It's about being with someone who has their life figured out. I'm trying to figure my life out. That's what this scholarship is about." He held up the letter again, but it felt worthless now. "Jake, you're a good guy. You really are. But good isn't enough anymore. I need someone who can take care of me. Someone who doesn't have to choose between buying groceries and putting gas in the car." That hit deep because it was true. Just last week, Jake had done exactly that. He'd walked to work for 3 days because he needed the money for food. "I worked 2 jobs to save money for your birthday dinner last month," Jake said quietly. "I thought it mattered to you that I cared enough to make that sacrifice." Rebecca's face softened for just a moment. "It did matter. But sacrifices aren't sustainable, Jake. I don't want to build a relationship on sacrifices and maybe some days." She walked over to where she'd left her purse by the door. Jake noticed for the first time how expensive it looked. He'd never really paid attention before, but now he wondered how someone working part-time at a boutique could afford something like that. "I'm sorry," Rebecca said, her hand on the door handle. "I really am. But I have to think about my future." "What about our future?" Jake asked, standing up. "What about all the plans we made?" "Those were dreams, Jake. David offers reality." And with that, she was gone. Jake stood in his empty apartment, still holding the acceptance letter that now felt like a cruel joke. The silence was deafening. He looked around his small space, the couch he'd bought at a thrift store, the TV he'd saved up for 6 months to buy, the tiny kitchen table where he studied every night. This morning, this place had felt like home. Now it felt like evidence of his failure. Jake walked to his refrigerator and opened it. Half a pizza from 2 days ago, some leftover rice, and a carton of milk that would expire tomorrow. This was what Rebecca was running from. This was the life she couldn't stand anymore. He sat back down on his couch and read the acceptance letter again. Full scholarship to one of the best law schools in the state. It should have been the beginning of everything. Instead, it felt like the end. His phone buzzed with a text message. For a split second, he hoped it might be Rebecca, saying she'd made a mistake. but it was just his boss asking if he could work extra hours tomorrow. Jake thought about David, the financial advisor with the downtown apartment and nice car. He wondered what that felt like, to have money in your bank account, to not check prices before ordering at restaurants, to buy things without calculating if you could afford them. He'd been so focused on his future success that he'd forgotten Rebecca was living in the present. While he was planning for the lawyer he'd become, she was tired of the delivery driver he was now. The acceptance letter crumpled slightly in his hands as he squeezed it. 3 years suddenly felt like forever. 3 years of living like this while other people lived like David. But something inside Jake started to harden. Maybe Rebecca was right that he didn't have his life figured out yet. Maybe she was right that he couldn't give her what she wanted right now. But she was wrong about one thing. He wasn't going to stay this way forever. As he sat in his quiet apartment that night, Jake made a promise to himself. He would go to law school. He would work harder than anyone else. And he would never again let someone walk away from him because he wasn't good enough. What Jake didn't know was that Rebecca had been keeping a secret much bigger than her new relationship. A secret that would have changed everything if he'd known the truth. But that night, sitting alone with his acceptance letter and broken heart, Jake could only see the path forward, one that would be paved with determination and the burning desire to prove that poor didn't mean worthless. The letter might have been crumpled, but his resolve was stronger than ever. 5 years had changed everything. Jake stepped out of his sleek black car and adjusted his tie as he looked up at the towering glass building that housed Miller and Associates, one of the city's most prestigious law firms. The man who once counted coins to buy groceries now wore a custom-tailored suit and carried a briefcase that cost more than his old monthly rent. The transformation hadn't been easy. 3 years of law school meant 3 years of 18-hour days, living on coffee and determination. While his classmates went to parties, Jake studied in the library until security kicked him out. While they took spring break trips, he worked summer internships that paid almost nothing, but taught him everything. His phone buzzed as he walked through the marble lobby. "Jake, the Peterson case files are on your desk." His assistant's voice came through his earpiece. "And don't forget you have the board meeting at 3. Jake smiled as he stepped into the elevator. 6 months ago, he'd been promoted to senior associate, making him the youngest lawyer at his level in the firm's history. The kid who used to deliver pizzas now had people delivering reports to him, but success had come with a price. Jake worked 7 days a week, often sleeping in his office. He'd moved into a nice apartment downtown, but he barely saw it except to shower and change clothes. His refrigerator was empty not because he couldn't afford food, but because he never had time to shop. 20 miles across the city, Rebecca was starting her morning shift at Brew and Bean, a trendy coffee shop in the Arts District. She tied her apron around her waist and checked the schedule. Another double shift, another day of steaming milk and pretending to care about customers' complicated drink orders. "Rebecca, table 6 wants to know if we have oat milk," her coworker called out. "Tell them yes." "But it's 50 cents extra," Rebecca replied, already knowing the customer would complain about the price. She'd learned to predict these things after working here for almost 2 years. Most people would find it strange that someone would choose to work as a barista when they didn't have to. But Rebecca had her reasons. Reasons she'd never told anyone, not even Jake, when they were together. Her phone rang during her break. The name on the screen made her stomach tighten. "Dad." "Hello, Father," she answered, walking to the alley behind the shop where no one could hear her. "Rebecca." "Sweetheart, I know you don't want to hear this again, but it's time to come home," the voice on the other end said. Richard Hartwell's voice carried the authority of someone used to getting his way. "This little rebellion of yours has gone on long enough." Rebecca leaned against the brick wall. "It's not a rebellion. This is my life. Working in a coffee shop when you could be running a division of Hartwell Industries, when you could be living in the penthouse instead of that tiny apartment. This is madness. This is honest work, Dad. This is real." Richard sighed heavily. "Your trust fund alone earns more in a day than you make in a month at that place. You're a Hartwell. You have responsibilities." "I never asked to be a Hartwell," Rebecca said quietly. "I never asked for any of it." After her father hung up, Rebecca stood in the alley for a few more minutes. She thought about her apartment, small but paid for with her own money. She thought about her co-workers who liked her for her personality, not her bank account. She thought about the life she was building with her own hands. What she didn't think about much anymore was Jake. But sometimes, usually late at night, she wondered what had happened to him. Whether he'd gone to law school, whether he hated her, whether he was happy. Back downtown, Jake was in his corner office reviewing contracts when his secretary knocked on the door. "Mr. Jake, there's a call from Hartwell Industries about the Morrison merger." Jake looked up from his papers. Hartwell Industries was one of the biggest tech companies in the world. If they were involved in the Morrison merger, this case just became much more important. "Put them through," he said, not knowing that he was about to enter a world that would bring him face to face with his past. The voice on the phone was crisp and professional. "Mr. Jake, this is Robert Chen from Hartwell Industries Legal Department. We understand Miller & Associates is representing Morrison Corp. In their acquisition talks." "That's correct," Jake replied, making notes. "We'd like to schedule a meeting next week. This merger is important to Mr. Hartwell personally, so he's sending his daughter to oversee negotiations." Jake barely registered the detail about the daughter. He was too focused on the size of this deal. If he handled this well, he might make partner before he turned 30. Meanwhile, Rebecca was finishing her shift when her father called again. "I need you to represent the family in the Morrison merger," Richard said without any greeting. "Dad, I don't know anything about business negotiations. You have an MBA from Harvard that I paid for. You know more than you pretend. Besides, it's time you started taking your place in the company." Rebecca felt trapped. She'd been avoiding this moment for years, but she knew her father wouldn't take no for an answer forever. "If I do this one thing, will you leave me alone? We'll discuss your future after you prove yourself," Richard said, which wasn't really a yes or a no. That night, Rebecca sat in her small apartment, looking at the business cards her father had sent over. Tomorrow, she would have to put on expensive clothes she hadn't worn in years and pretend to be someone she'd been running from. She pulled out her laptop and started researching Miller & Associates, the law firm representing the other side. She needed to know who she'd be dealing with. Jake spent that same evening in his office researching Hartwell Industries. He read about Richard Hartwell's rise from a college dropout to a billionaire. He read about the company's innovative technology and global reach. What he couldn't find much information about was Richard's daughter, who apparently kept a very low profile. Both of them went to sleep that night planning for a business meeting that would change everything. Neither suspected that fate was about to bring them together again in the most unexpected way. Jake had spent 5 years building himself into the kind of man he thought Rebecca wanted. He'd achieved success beyond his wildest dreams from that night when she walked out of his apartment. Rebecca had spent 5 years running from the very world that Jake was now trying to conquer. She'd chosen struggle over privilege, authenticity over wealth. Tomorrow, their two very different paths would cross again in a conference room downtown, and when they did, both would learn that sometimes the biggest revelations come not from what people show you, but from what they've been hiding all along. The boy who once counted coins to buy pizza was now counting millions in merger deals. The girl who left him for being poor had been rich all along, but chose poverty over privilege. Neither knew that their biggest challenge wouldn't be the business deal they were about to negotiate, but the emotions they thought they'd left in the past. Jake straightened his tie one last time as he walked toward the conference room on the 42nd floor. This was the biggest deal of his career, and he'd spent the entire weekend preparing. The Morrison merger would either make his reputation or break it. He carried his leather briefcase with confidence, nodding to colleagues as he passed. The scared delivery driver who once worried about gas money was gone. In his place stood a man who commanded respect in boardrooms across the city. "Morning, Jake," his partner Tom called out. "Ready to show Hartwell Industries what we're made of?" "More than ready," Jake replied, checking his watch. "Their team should be here any minute." Jake pushed open the heavy glass doors to the conference room and stopped cold. The briefcase slipped from his hand and hit the marble floor with a loud thud that echoed through the room. Sitting at the far end of the polished table, wearing a sharp business suit he'd never seen before, was Rebecca. She looked up from the documents she was reviewing and their eyes met across the room. The color drained from her face as she recognized him. "Jake," she whispered, barely audible. The other people in the room, lawyers, assistants, executives, continued their conversations, unaware that two former lovers were staring at each other in complete shock. Jake's mind raced. What was Rebecca doing here? How was she involved with Hartwell Industries? The last time he'd seen her, she was working part-time at a boutique and complaining about his lack of money. "Mr. Jake?" Tom appeared beside him, looking concerned. Everything okay? Jake snapped back to reality and picked up his briefcase. Yes, fine, just surprised to see a familiar face. Rebecca stood up slowly as Jake approached the table. She was introduced by the man next to her as Rebecca Hartwell, representing Hartwell Industries in this negotiation. Hartwell. The name hit Jake like a freight train. Ms. Hartwell, Jake said formally, extending his hand. I'm Jake Morrison, lead counsel for Morrison Corp. Rebecca shook his hand and Jake noticed her fingers were trembling slightly. Mr. Morrison, she replied, her voice steadier than her hands. I look forward to working with you on this deal. The formal introduction felt surreal. Here was the woman who had broken his heart, sitting across from him as the daughter of one of the richest men in America. As the meeting began, Jake struggled to focus. His mind kept wandering back to that night 5 years ago when Rebecca had told him she needed someone with real prospects. Now he discovered she was worth more money than he could ever dream of making. Mr. Morrison, what are your thoughts on the intellectual property clauses? Rebecca asked during the discussion. Jake looked up from his notes. I think we need to be more specific about patent transfers, he said, falling back into professional mode. But inside, he was burning with questions. During the first break, Rebecca excused herself to the bathroom. Jake waited a few minutes, then followed. He found her in the hallway, leaning against the wall with her eyes closed. Rebecca, what the hell is going on? Jake asked, keeping his voice low. She opened her eyes and looked at him. Up close, he could see she was just as shaken as he was. I know how this looks, she said quietly. How this looks. You're Richard Hartwell's daughter. You're worth billions of dollars. And you left me because I was poor? Rebecca glanced around to make sure no one could hear them. It's complicated, Jake. Complicated. You told me you couldn't wait for me to get my life together. You said you needed someone with money. Meanwhile, you were sitting on a fortune? That's not... I wasn't sitting on anything. I was running from it. Jake stared at her. What does that mean? It means I didn't want that life. I still don't want it. So you work at a boutique instead? You live in a tiny apartment? You break up with your boyfriend because he can't afford fancy restaurants? Rebecca's face flushed. I don't work at a boutique anymore. I work at a coffee shop, and I pay my own rent with my own money. Why? Jake asked, genuinely confused. Why would you choose to struggle when you don't have to? Because I wanted to know who I really was without all of this. Rebecca gestured around at the expensive building. I wanted to know if anyone could love me for me, not for my trust fund. Jake felt a bitter laugh escape his throat. So you tested me by lying to me? I didn't lie. I just didn't tell you everything. You watched me work 2 jobs to save money for your birthday dinner. You watched me stress about paying rent. You knew how hard I was struggling and you said nothing? Rebecca's eyes filled with tears. I was scared, Jake. My last boyfriend only stayed with me after he found out about the money. He started asking me to pay for everything, to help his family, to invest in his business ideas. I didn't want that to happen with us. So instead you made me feel like I wasn't good enough. That's not what I wanted. Jake shook his head. But that's what happened. Do you have any idea what that night did to me? How it made me feel? Before Rebecca could answer, Tom appeared around the corner. Jake, they're ready to reconvene. Back in the conference room, Jake struggled to concentrate on the merger details. Every time Rebecca spoke, he heard echoes of their breakup conversation. Every time she reviewed a document, he thought about the acceptance letter he'd been holding when she walked out. The financial projections look solid, Rebecca was saying to the room. But I'd like to review the employment retention numbers more carefully. Jake watched her work. She was clearly intelligent and well-prepared. This wasn't someone pretending to understand business. She knew what she was talking about. Ms. Hartwell raises a good point, Jake said, forcing himself to be professional. We should schedule a follow-up meeting to dive deeper into those numbers. After the meeting ended, Jake packed his briefcase slowly, hoping Rebecca would approach him. But she left quickly with her team, barely making eye contact. That evening, Jake sat in his expensive apartment, staring out at the city lights. 5 years ago, Rebecca had said she needed someone who could give her the life she wanted. Now he could give her that life and more. But it turned out she'd never needed anyone to give her anything. His phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Can we talk? Coffee tomorrow at 8 a.m., Brew and Bean on 5th Street. Rebecca, Jake stared at the message. Brew and Bean. That must be where she worked. He typed back, "I'll be there." As he got ready for bed that night, Jake realized the strangest part wasn't that Rebecca was rich. It was that she had chosen to be poor. She had given up a life of luxury to work in a coffee shop and live in a small apartment. The woman who had left him for not having enough money had been running away from money all along. Tomorrow, he would finally get the answers he'd been wondering about for 5 years. But Jake had a feeling that the truth would be more complicated than anything he could have imagined. The merger negotiations were just beginning, but Jake suspected the real negotiation would be between his heart and his head. Jake arrived at Brew and Bean 15 minutes early, his stomach churning with nerves he hadn't felt since law school exams. The coffee shop was exactly the kind of place Rebecca would choose. Cozy, unpretentious, with mismatched chairs and local art on the walls. Nothing like the sterile corporate world where they'd faced off yesterday. He ordered a black coffee and chose a corner table where they could talk privately. At exactly 8 o'clock, Rebecca walked through the door wearing jeans and a simple sweater, looking more like the woman he'd once known than the polished executive from the conference room. She got her coffee from behind the counter herself, and Jake realized she wasn't just meeting him here, she actually worked here. "Thanks for coming," Rebecca said as she sat down across from him, her hands wrapped around her mug like she was trying to warm herself. "I almost didn't," Jake replied honestly. "Part of me wanted to pretend yesterday never happened." Rebecca nodded. "I thought about running. I've gotten pretty good at that over the years." They sat in silence for a moment, both unsure how to begin a conversation 5 years in the making. "I need to understand something," Jake finally said. "When we were together, were you lying about everything?" "No," Rebecca said quickly. "I wasn't lying about my feelings for you. That was all real. But you were lying about who you were." Rebecca sighed. "I was hiding who my father was. There's a difference." "Is there?" "Because from where I'm sitting, it feels like the same thing." Rebecca leaned forward. "Jake, do you know what it's like to never know if someone likes you for you, or for what you can do for them?" "Actually, I do," Jake said with a bitter laugh. "I spent my whole childhood knowing people looked down on me because of what I couldn't do for them. The difference is I never had a choice about being poor. And I never had a choice about being rich," Rebecca shot back. "Do you think I asked to be born into this?" Jake studied her face. "So you decided to pretend you weren't?" "I decided to find out who I was without it." Rebecca's voice got quieter. "When I turned 18, my father gave me access to my trust fund. Suddenly, every friend I had was asking for loans. Every guy I dated started talking about business investments or expensive trips they couldn't afford. So you cut yourself off?" "I set myself up with a small monthly allowance and got a job. I wanted to see if I could make it on my own. I wanted to meet people who didn't know my last name." Jake shook his head. "But you let me struggle. You watched me count change to buy groceries while you had millions in the bank." Rebecca's eyes filled with tears. "I know how that sounds. But I was terrified that if you knew about the money, everything would change. You'd start seeing dollar signs instead of me. So instead you made me feel like I wasn't enough. I never meant to do that." "But you did it anyway," Jake said, his voice rising slightly. "Do you know what that night did to me? When you told me you needed someone with real prospects?" Rebecca wiped her eyes with her sleeve. "I was scared, Jake. My last relationship ended when my boyfriend found out about my family. Suddenly he wanted me to pay for everything. Fancy dinners, trips, his car payments. He said if I really loved him, I'd help him out. When I said no, he called me selfish and greedy." Jake felt some of his anger deflate. "So you thought I'd do the same thing?" "I didn't know, and I was too scared to find out." They sat quietly again, watching other customers come and go. Jake noticed how Rebecca interacted with her coworkers. They joked with her, asked about her weekend plans. This was her real life, not the boardroom. "Why are you working here?" Jake asked. "I mean, really working here? Making coffee for $8 an hour when you could buy this whole building." Rebecca smiled sadly. "Because here I'm just Rebecca who makes good lattes and always covers extra shifts. I'm not Rebecca Hartwell, the billionaire's daughter. People here like me because I'm funny, or because I remember their usual order, or because I listen when they're having a bad day." "But you're still living a lie." "No, I'm living the life I choose. The money is there if I need it for emergencies, but I pay my rent with my paycheck. I buy my food with money I earned. Might sound crazy to you, but it feels honest." Jake looked around the coffee shop. Is this what you want? Forever? I don't know, Rebecca admitted. My father keeps pressuring me to join the company. Yesterday was supposed to be a test, prove I can handle business and maybe he'll respect my choices more. How's that going? Rebecca laughed, but it wasn't happy. Well, I didn't expect my test to include facing my ex-boyfriend across a negotiation table. Jake couldn't help but smile at that. Yeah, that wasn't in my business school training either. Look at you, though, Rebecca said, her voice softer now. You did exactly what you said you'd do. You went to law school, you became successful. You're everything you planned to be. I became what I thought you wanted me to be, Jake corrected her. Is that why you did it? To prove something to me? Jake thought about that. At first, maybe. I was angry and I wanted to show you that you'd made a mistake. But somewhere along the way, it became about proving something to myself. Are you happy? Rebecca asked. The question caught Jake off guard. I'm successful. That's not what I asked. Jake stirred his coffee, thinking. I work 90 hours a week. I live in a great apartment that I never see. I make more money than I know what to do with, but I eat takeout alone at my desk most nights. So honestly, I don't know if I'm happy. I'm sorry, Rebecca said quietly. For what? For making you feel like you needed to become someone else to be worthy of love. Jake felt something in his chest loosen at those words. Why didn't you just tell me the truth back then? Because I was 22 and stupid and scared. Because I'd rather have you hate me for being poor than use me for being rich. Rebecca paused. And because I thought if you really loved me, you'd fight for us regardless of money. I would have fought for us if I'd known what I was fighting. I know that now. But hindsight is pretty useless, isn't it? Jake looked at her, really looked at her. The designer clothes from yesterday were gone. Her makeup was simple. She looked tired but genuine, like someone who worked real hours for real money. So what happens now? He asked. Now we finish the merger negotiations professionally. And then, I don't know, do you regret it? Leaving that night? Rebecca was quiet for a long time. I regret how I did it. I regret not trusting you enough to tell you the truth. But Jake, if I hadn't left, would you have pushed yourself to become the man you are now? It was Jake's turn to be quiet. I don't know. Maybe we both needed these 5 years to figure out who we really are. Jake's phone buzzed with a meeting reminder. I have to get to the office. The merger negotiations continue today, Rebecca said, standing up. Can you handle working with me? Jake asked. Can you handle working with me? She shot back. Jake almost smiled. I guess we'll find out. As they walked to the door together, Jake realized that everything he thought he knew about their story had been wrong. But maybe, just maybe, it wasn't over yet. 3 weeks had passed since the merger deal closed successfully. Jake had handled his part flawlessly, and Rebecca had impressed everyone with her business instincts. But now, sitting in his office late on a Friday evening, Jake felt an emptiness that success couldn't fill. His phone buzzed with a text from Rebecca. Coffee? Same place? I have something to tell you. Jake stared at the message for a full minute before typing back. Give me 20 minutes. The coffee shop was nearly empty when he arrived. Rebecca was already there, sitting at their usual corner table, but she looked different. More relaxed somehow, like a weight had been lifted off her shoulders. Thanks for coming, she said as he sat down. I wasn't sure you would. After working together for 3 weeks, I figured we could at least be civil, Jake replied, though his tone was warmer than his words suggested. Rebecca smiled. About that, I have news. I'm officially joining Hartwell Industries. Jake raised his eyebrows. Really? What changed your mind? You did, actually. Me? Rebecca leaned forward. Watching you these past few weeks, seeing how you handle business, how you treat people, how you've built something from nothing. It made me realize I've been running from responsibility instead of running toward authenticity. Jake stirred his coffee slowly. So you're giving up all this? He gestured around the coffee shop. Not exactly. I'm buying this place. What? Rebecca grinned. My first act as a Hartwell Industries executive is acquiring Brew and Bean. I'm going to expand it into a chain, but keep the same feel. Local art, living wages for workers, community focus. I want to prove that business can be both profitable and meaningful. Jake couldn't help but smile. That's actually brilliant. I learned from the best. You built your career on helping people, not just making money. Maybe it's time I did the same with mine. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, watching the barista clean up for closing. There's something else, Rebecca said quietly. I owe you an apology. A real one. Rebecca, we've been through this. No, let me finish. She took a deep breath. I was wrong to test you like that. I was wrong to make decisions about our relationship based on my fear instead of talking to you about it. But most of all, I was wrong to let you think you weren't enough. You were always enough, Jake. More than enough. Jake felt something in his chest that he'd been holding tight for 5 years finally begin to loosen. I spent so long being angry at you, he said. But somewhere along the way, I realized the anger was really at myself. For not fighting harder. For not asking the right questions. For letting you walk away without understanding why. We were both young and scared, Rebecca said. I was scared of being used and you were scared of not being worthy. Maybe we needed these 5 years to figure out who we really are. Jake looked at her across the table. So who are you really, Rebecca Hartwell? I'm someone who makes decent coffee and even better business decisions. Someone who wants to use her advantages to help others instead of running from them. Someone who's tired of being afraid of her own feelings. And what are your feelings? Rebecca met his eyes. That I never stopped caring about you. That seeing you again reminded me why I fell for you in the first place. And that I'd like to try again, if you're willing. But this time with complete honesty. Jake felt his heart racing. Rebecca, I know it's complicated. I know we both have different lives now. But I also know that the best thing that ever happened to me was loving you. And the worst thing was losing you. Jake was quiet for a long time, thinking about the past 5 years. The late nights at the office, the empty apartment, the success that felt hollow without someone to share it with. I've been thinking about making some changes, he said finally. What kind of changes? I'm considering leaving the firm, starting my own practice, maybe focusing on helping people who can't afford big law firms. You know, giving back to people like I used to be. Rebecca's eyes lit up. That sounds like the Jake I remember. The broke Jake? The Jake who cared about justice more than money. The Jake who studied law because he wanted to help people, not because he wanted to prove something. Jake realized she was right. Somewhere along the way, his motivation had shifted from helping others to proving himself worthy. Maybe it was time to remember why he'd wanted to become a lawyer in the first place. If I did start my own practice, I'd need clients. Maybe some business law work to pay the bills while I build up the pro bono cases. Rebecca grinned. I might know someone who's starting a new business and could use a good lawyer. Really? Anyone I know? A very demanding client. She'll probably want to meet for coffee every week to discuss cases. Jake laughed, really laughed, for the first time in weeks. That sounds terrible. I charge extra for demanding clients. I can afford it. They looked at each other across the table, and Jake felt something he hadn't experienced in 5 years. Possibility. Not just the possibility of success or achievement, but the possibility of happiness. So where do we go from here? He asked. Slowly, Rebecca said. We're different people than we were 5 years ago. I want to get to know who you are now, and I want you to know who I'm becoming. What if we find out we don't fit anymore? Then at least we'll know. But Jake, I've spent 5 years trying to convince myself that what we had wasn't real, that it was just young love or convenience or whatever. But seeing you again, working with you, remembering how you make me laugh, I think what we had was real. And I think it could be real again. Jake reached across the table and took her hand. It felt familiar and foreign at the same time. I'd like that, he said. But I have one condition. What's that? No more secrets. No more tests. No more trying to protect each other from the truth. Deal, Rebecca said, squeezing his hand. But I have a condition too. What? Next time we have problems, we talk about them instead of walking away. Deal. 6 months later. Jake was sitting in his new office, smaller than his old one, but filled with sunlight and the satisfaction of work that mattered. His first major client had been Brew & Bean's expansion, which was already opening its second location. Rebecca walked in carrying 2 coffee cups and a stack of contracts. Your 3 o'clock is here, she announced, setting his coffee on his desk. I thought my 3 o'clock was reviewing the Madison Street lease. It is. I'm also bringing dinner. You're working too hard again. Jake smiled and pulled her down for a kiss. Some things never change. Some things do, though, Rebecca said, holding up her left hand where a simple engagement ring caught the light. Yeah, Jake agreed. looking at the ring he'd given her the week before. Some things definitely do. Outside the window, the city buzzed with the energy of people chasing their dreams. But inside the small office, two people who had found their way back to each other were building something better than they'd ever imagined. A partnership based on truth, trust, and the understanding that the best love stories aren't about finding the perfect person, but about choosing to grow together.